Sutton died last night, according to his son, Darren. Don spent 23 years in Major League Baseball, mostly with the Dodgers. He was 75. The thought of Don Sutton dying.
Things I remember most were his competitiveness, his durability. He was someone, and I think all of us need, if we're going to be successful, we need to have goals. We need to have people to play off of. Pete Rose and I used to always, have that 200 hit plateau.
Don Sutton died at 75. And the tragic truth is that the clean story everyone told was never the whole story. The world remembered a Hall of Fame pitcher, the A man who won 324 games. The A calm and friendly voice in the broadcast booth for almost 30 years. People called him classy. People called him steady. People called him a hero. All of that was real. Behind the kind words was a much harder man and a story that baseball did not always want to tell out loud. I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. He had passed away on January 19th, 2021. He had fought cancer for a long time, and he kept most of that fight private, away from the public eye, almost to the very end. The public mostly saw the polished version of his life. And if stories like this deserve more than the clean version, use the hype feature and give this video some hype, because Sutton's real story gets much darker from here. When he died, the tributes came fast. Teams honored him. League leaders praised him. They talked about his durability. They talked about his 3 decades of broadcasting. They talked about a man who showed up year after year and did his job better than almost anyone. It was all true. He really was that durable. He really was that respected. He was a Hall of Fame pitcher who won 324 games and struck out 3,574 batters. He was a familiar voice to a whole generation of Braves fans. But here's the thing about tributes. They are written to comfort, not to explain. They focus on the milestone. They focus on the trophies. They pick the nice stories and quietly skip the rest. That is what happened with Sutton. The kind words told people what he achieved. They did not tell people who he really was. Because the tributes left out the fights, they left out the accusations, they left out the cold, self-interested choices that followed him for years. The problem was never that Sutton lacked greatness. The problem was that his greatness came wrapped in conflict, came with calculation. It came with friction. It came with a long list of things baseball preferred to leave out of the highlight reel. The clean version made him simple. The real version was anything but. To understand the real Sutton, you have to start with the team that built his image. You have to start with the Los Angeles Dodgers and the story they told the world about themselves. The 1970s, the Dodgers sold a beautiful idea. They called it the Dodger family. The manager, Tommy Lasorda, pushed it hard. He spoke about brotherhood. He spoke about unity. He even talked about the big Dodger in the sky like the team was something close to a church. It was a clean, warm, friendly picture. Fans loved it. The sponsors loved it. It looked perfect. It was the kind of story that sells tickets and sells products. The team wanted one story for the public, and they worked hard to keep that story neat. Sutton did not buy it. He was direct. He was rational. He thought the whole family act was fake, and he was not shy about saying so. He even called the religious talk sacrilegious. He was not a man who liked pretending. He looked at the polished image and saw a sales pitch, not a brotherhood. And in a clubhouse built on pretending, that made him a problem. The A man who refuses to play along with the show is a danger to the show. The face of that clean image was Steve Garvey. Garvey was the crown jewel. He looked like the perfect American star. He was a family man. He had an Eagle Scout image. He had big commercial deals and a high public profile. He was the man teams put on posters. He was exactly what the Dodgers wanted to sell. But Sutton and some of his teammates saw something hollow under that shine. They thought the image was built on purpose, like a product. So Sutton spoke up. He gave an interview to a writer named Thomas Boswell of the Washington Post. And in that interview, Sutton said something that broke the spell. He said the real most valuable player on the team was not Garvey. It was the outfielder Reggie Smith. He said Smith was not a facade. He said Smith was not a Madison Avenue image. Think about what that really meant. Sutton was not just praising one player over another. He was attacking the team's whole sales pitch. He was telling the world that the clean face of the franchise was not even the most important man on it. He was saying the marketing did not match the reality on the field. In a sport that loves its heroes, that is a dangerous thing to say. The team wanted one story, the story of its golden boy. Sutton handed the public a different story, and he backed it with truth. And here's the uncomfortable part. Sutton was right. By the simple numbers, Garvey looked huge. He piled up hits and runs and big batting averages season after season. Look at his peak years and you see why fans worshipped him. In 1974, he played 156 games, collected 200 hits, hit 21 home runs, drove in 111 runs, and batted .312. In 1975, he played 160 games and got 210 hits with a .319 average. In 1976, another 200 hits and a .317 average. In 1977, he hit 33 home runs and drove in 115 runs. In 1978, the very year of the fight, he had 202 hits, 113 runs batted in, and a .316 average. On paper, that is a superstar. That is exactly the kind of line that goes on a poster. But the deeper numbers told a different story. The raw totals were loud, yet they hid a quieter truth. In 1977 and 1978, Garvey's on-base plus slugging was good but not elite. Reggie Smith's was far better over that same stretch. Smith got on base more often. Smith did more damage with each swing. Garvey loved to swing at almost everything, and that free swinging style cost the team. Over those 2 seasons, Garvey grounded into 22 more double plays than Smith did. That is 22 extra rallies he helped kill, and when you add it all up into one final value number, wins above replacement, Smith was worth more to the Dodgers than Garvey was. The unheralded man was the better player. The marketed man was not. So when Sutton said it out loud, he was not lying. He was just breaking the rules of the show. And in baseball, breaking the rules of the show can be more dangerous than being wrong. The tension finally exploded on August 20th, 1978. The place was Shea Stadium in New York. The visiting clubhouse there was famous for being small, cramped, and ugly. People called it a dump. It was the worst possible place for 2 angry men to collide. The day before, Sutton had pitched well. He beat the Mets 8-4. So this was not about a bad game. This was about words. Garvey cared deeply about his reputation. He cared about his endorsements and his clean name. So he walked up to Sutton and asked him a direct question. He asked if he had been misquoted. Sutton did not back down. He confirmed the quotes. He had said it, and he meant it. And right there, the conversation began to fall apart. Garvey had a habit that drove Sutton crazy. He liked to point his finger straight at a man's chest. He did it to Sutton. And Sutton, already irritated, grabbed the finger. From there, it turned ugly fast. The 2 traded personal insults. The insults got nasty. Some of them were aimed at Garvey's wife, Cindy. There was no coming back from that. Then it became physical. Sutton leaped at Garvey. He flung him into a row of lockers. The 2 men went down hard. They clawed at each other, threw wild punches. In that tiny, junky room, there was nowhere to escape. There were no soft places to land. It was raw and personal, and this was not a staged shove for the cameras. This was 2 grown men trying to hurt each other. Teammates had to break it up. The Reggie Smith, Rick Monday, Davey Lopes, and Bill Russell rushed in and pulled the 2 apart. It took several men to stop it. The general manager, Al Campanis, led Garvey away into the trainer's room. Garvey was bleeding. He came out of it with a scratched face and a red eye. Sutton came out with a bruised cheek. The perfect Dodger family had just beaten each other up in a dirty visiting clubhouse. The clean image was sitting on the floor with a bloody face. The most telling moment was not the punches. It was the reaction. When someone shouted that the fight should be stopped before they killed each other, the catcher, Joe Ferguson, gave a chilling answer. He simply said, "Good." That one word said more than any tribute ever could. It showed how deep the anger ran inside that so-called family. And then comes the part that should sit strangely with you. The Dodgers won that day anyway. They beat the Mets again. Garvey himself singled, drove in a run, and scored the tying run. Ferguson doubled in the go-ahead run. The same men who had just tried to hurt each other in a cramped clubhouse walked out onto the field and worked together to win the game. They could hate each other in private and still perform in public. Think about what that takes. It takes the ability to bury real anger and put on a show the moment the gates open. That is not a sign of a healthy family. That is the opposite. It is a sign of professionals who had learned to hide the truth behind the final score, and who did it so well that fans never knew a war had just been fought in the room next door. So the clean image cracked wide open in private that day. But the cracks stayed hidden from the public for the most part, and that was only the loud, blunt side of Sutton, the side that throws punches. The next story is darker because it moves away from open fights and into something much quieter. It moves into the cold choices a man makes when no one is watching. Move forward to 1987. Sutton was now with the California Angels. So was a pitcher named John Candelaria. And that season, Candelaria was arrested twice for driving under the influence of alcohol. The second arrest came on May 14, 1987, after the team flew back to California from a road trip to Detroit. The next spring, in 1988, Candelaria had been traded to the New York Yankees. And from there, he made a serious accusation. He said Sutton had tipped off the police before that second arrest. He said Sutton helped set him up. There were 2 ways to read it. Sutton said he made the report out of concern. He said he was worried about Candelaria's safety. That is one version. Candelaria saw it another way. He believed Sutton acted out of pure self-interest. He believed Sutton did it to protect himself. To understand why this cut so deep, you have to know what Candelaria had already been through. On Christmas Day in 1984, his 18-month-old son fell into a swimming pool. The boy spent 11 months in a coma. He died in November 1985. That is a level of pain most people cannot imagine. Losing a baby is a wound that never fully heals. It left Candelaria fragile and very protective of his private life. After his first arrest, he told reporters his drinking was nobody's business but his own on his days off. This was a man carrying grief that he could not put down. So when a teammate seemed to make his troubles worse, it hit a very tender place. Now place Sutton's situation next to that pain, and the picture gets cold. At the start of 1987, Sutton was 42 years old. In baseball years, that is ancient for a pitcher. He was pitching badly. He had a record of 0 wins and 3 losses. His earned run average sat at 7.20 in his first 3 starts. That is poor by any standard. He was close to being released. He was running out of road and he knew it. Candelaria, on the other hand, was the better pitcher. He was a real threat to Sutton's spot in the rotation. The only one of them could be sure of a job, and the younger, healthier arm was winning that quiet contest. And then the police report happened. After it, Candelaria ended up on the disabled list. Then he went into a rehabilitation program. And just like that, a better pitcher was gone from the rotation. The threat disappeared. Sutton kept his job. The research does not prove that Sutton did it only for himself, but it shows why the accusation was so hard for some people to brush away. The timing was ugly. The benefit to Sutton was clear. There was one more detail that made it worse. Sutton and Candelaria lived only a quarter of a mile apart, yet Sutton never reached out to him during rehab. He never reached out after the trade. For a man who said he acted out of concern, that silence was loud. The call was real. This was not just an angry teammate making things up. The Angels manager Gene Mauch later confirmed that Sutton had indeed phoned the police. The Maua also said he disagreed with how the whole thing was handled, so whatever Sutton's true reason was, the action itself was never in doubt. He made the call. The struggling 42-year-old pitcher, fighting to keep his job, made a call that removed a better and younger pitcher from his path. Lays out the timing, the benefit, and the silence, and it lets you decide for yourself what kind of man makes that choice. And this was not a one-time thing. Sutton's habit of putting himself first showed up again and again near the end of his career. The Candelaria story was not a strange accident. It fit who he had always been. In 1988, a Dodgers executive named Fred Clare publicly accused Sutton of breaking league rules. He said Sutton had talked about a front office job with the Houston Astros while he was still under contract as a Dodgers player. In plain terms, the team felt he was lining up his next job with a rival while he was supposed to be loyal to them. Sutton waved it off. He said it was just a casual chat at a game, nothing serious. Maybe it was, but it fit a pattern that teams had learned to expect from him. Years before that, when Sutton actually played for the Astros, he had clashed with the general manager, Al Rosen. Sutton had openly said he wanted to finish his career on the West Coast to be near his family. On its own, that sounds harmless and even sweet, but Rosen did not hear it that way. He heard a player using public pressure to steer his own future, and it stung Rosen for a personal reason. Rosen had retired early from his own playing days to focus on his family. So when Sutton turned family into public leverage, Rosen took it as a personal insult, almost a mockery of his own choices. Over and over, Sutton put his own wants first. And over, it caused friction with the men who ran his teams. He was loyal to one thing above all, and that thing was Don Sutton. So far, we have seen a man who fought teammates and worked the angles. But the biggest shadow over his career is something else entirely. It is the thing opponents whispered about for more than 20 years. It is the question of whether his 324 wins were truly clean. Here is the simple version of the accusation. People believed Sutton doctored the baseball. That means he changed the ball on purpose to make it move in strange ways. He was accused of scuffing it. He was accused of scratching it. He was accused of putting something on it. The clean baseball flies in fairly steady ways. But a ball with a rough mark or a slick spot behaves differently. It can dip, it can dart, it can break late, right as the batter swings. The pitcher who can make a ball do that has a hidden weapon that no hitter can prepare for. That is why the charge was so serious. It was not a small thing. It struck at whether his success was honest and whether those huge win totals were truly earned or partly stolen. This was not one bitter rival making noise. It was many respected baseball men over many years. The manager Sparky Anderson believed it. The star Lou Brock believed it. So did Bill Buckner. The catcher Ted Simmons of the Cardinals said Sutton's pitches acted like a dry spitball. The spitball is an illegal pitch, so that was a sharp accusation to make out loud. These were not nobodies looking for excuses. These were people who studied the game for a living, who watched Sutton up close, and who came away convinced something was off. Now, to be fair, Sutton had real and rare skill. He threw many different pitches, not just one or two. He had a knuckle curve, a fastball, a slider, a changeup, and a kind of screwball. That is 5 weapons, and most pitchers have far fewer. He was smart about how he used them. He had excellent control, placing the ball almost wherever he wanted. He did not need to throw the hardest ball in the league to win, because he could outthink hitters instead. The Dodgers coach named Monty Basgall once said Sutton could make the ball talk. That praise was meant to be about pure skill, about a craftsman who knew his trade. The accusations gave those same words a darker second meaning. Maybe the ball was talking, maybe it was just being helped along. And here's what made it all so slippery. Sutton never got angry about the charges, and he never broke down and confessed either. Instead, he turned the whole thing into a joke. When umpires searched him, he played games with them. He left little notes hidden in his uniform pockets and in his glove fingers, just waiting for them to be found during a search. One of those notes read, "You're getting warmer," but it's not here. He was laughing at the very people trying to catch him, turning a serious inspection into a punchline. When someone asked him straight out about using Vaseline, he gave a now famous answer. He said it was not true at all, because Vaseline is made right here in the United States of America. It was clever, it was funny, and it dodged the real question completely without ever saying yes or no. That was the trick, used again and again. Every time the charge got serious, Sutton made everyone laugh instead of think. The humor did not prove him innocent. Not at all. It just made it harder and harder for anyone to keep pushing for a real answer. The laughing room does not demand the truth, but sometimes the humor ran out and the defiance took over. On June 8, 1977, the Dodgers played the Chicago Cubs. Bill Buckner and Cubs manager Herman Franks were sure something was wrong. They demanded that the umpire search Sutton for sandpaper, the kind of rough paper a pitcher could use to scuff a ball. The plate umpire, Bruce Froemming, checked him over. The search found nothing at all. The normal pitcher might have just walked away, glad to be cleared. Sutton did not walk away. He made it worse on purpose. He knelt down on the mound in front of everyone. Then he rubbed the game ball hard into the dirt, almost like a dare, almost like he was taunting the men who had just searched him. When the third base umpire, Dick Stello, asked him to hand over the ball, Sutton did not hand it over politely. He fired it low and hard, skimming it right past Stello and rolling it out into left field. Then, as Froemming marched toward the mound with his face red and his veins showing, Sutton insulted him to his face. He called him a fat, gutless little jackass. He was ejected on the spot. Look at what that scene really shows. The point is not only that Sutton was accused, the point is that Sutton seemed to enjoy it. He turned a clean search into a fight. He treated the umpires like enemies to be mocked instead of officials to respect. The truly innocent man, just cleared by a search, might have stayed calm and let it go. Sutton chose war instead. That choice tells you something the box score never will. The clearest example of his edge came the next year, July 14th, 1978. The Dodgers were at Bush Memorial Stadium in St. Louis. Early in the game, the first base umpire, Jerry Crawford, found a baseball that was heavily marked up. He showed it to the crew chief, Doug Harvey. Later, in the 6th inning, after a batter named Keith Hernandez lined out, Harvey grabbed that ball too. It had the same kind of scuff mark on it. The Harvey did not just shrug. He went to manager Tommy Lasorda and gave a clear warning. He said someone was fooling with the baseball. Then, in the 7th inning, he ejected Sutton. Now here is where Sutton showed his sharpest weapon, and it was not a pitch. The rule was simple. The pitching a defaced ball brought an automatic 10-day suspension. That should have been the end of it. The umpire found the marked ball. The umpire ejected the man. The suspension should have followed, but Sutton and his legal team did something almost no player did. Threatened a huge federal lawsuit. They aimed it at Harvey, at the National League, and at the umpires. They turned a baseball ejection into a legal war. Their argument was clever and cold. They said Harvey could prove the ball was defaced, but he could not prove that Sutton himself had defaced it. He could only prove that Sutton had thrown it. That tiny gap, the gap between throwing a marked ball and marking it, was enough. The league looked at the cost of a giant court fight over who really polices the game, and it blinked. The National League president, Chub Feeney, backed down. He let Sutton off with just a warning. No suspension, no fine, nothing. The penalty that was supposed to be automatic simply vanished. Think about how rare that was. Sutton did not just work the mound. He worked the legal system, and he won. And the contrast with other players is harsh and unfair. Take a pitcher named Rick Honeycutt. He got caught with a thumbtack taped to his finger, a clear and simple piece of evidence. For that, he was suspended for 10 days and fined $250. He faced the rules head on, and the rules won. Sutton, accused for far longer and by far more people, escaped completely clean. One man got caught and paid the price like the system intended. The other man turned the system itself into a weapon and walked away free. Same crime in the eyes of his accusers. Very different endings. By now, Sutton's reputation had become almost a part of the game itself. The searches and the jokes turned into a kind of show that fans and players half expected. During a 1982 start for the Astros, the umpire Don Denkinger warned Sutton that a mysteriously scuffed ball had come into the game. He asked Sutton not to throw it if he found another one like it. Sutton replied that he agreed completely, because those marked balls were so hard to throw straight. He was openly joking about the very thing he was accused of doing right to the umpire's face. The hysteria reached the very top of baseball. The Yankees owner George Steinbrenner was watching a game from his home in Tampa, far from the field. He got so angry at the way Sutton handled the ball that he picked up the phone and called his manager Lou Piniella in the dugout during the game. He demanded that Piniella have Sutton searched and punished on the spot. He went on a wild rant about wanting Sutton frisked, arrested, and dealt with right then and there. That is how worked up Sutton could make a grown man, a team owner, sitting hundreds of miles away. Even rival pitchers played along with the legend. The Yankees pitcher named George Frazier joked that he did not use any foreign substances because everything he used was made in the United States. It was a wink straight at Sutton's old Vaseline line. The whole league was in on the bit, and Sutton himself leaned into the circus harder than anyone. After being searched so many times, he joked that he ought to get a Black & Decker commercial out of it, since Black & Decker makes sanders and tools. And here's the punchline. He actually landed a commercial deal later. He turned the accusation that he cheated into a paycheck. It was all very funny. It was colorful. It made great stories. But step back and the negative truth is clear. The jokes did real work. They took something serious. The idea that a Hall of Fame career might have been built partly on cheating and turned it into harmless comedy. Laughter became a shield. The more people laughed, the less they pushed for answers. The clean version of Sutton survived because the dirty version was so entertaining. Now we reach a different kind of debate. Not about cheating, but about greatness itself. For years, baseball writers argued over one question. Was Don Sutton truly dominant, or was he just a compiler? That word matters. So let me keep it simple. The compiler is a player who builds giant career numbers, mostly by lasting a very long time. He is not always the best in any single season. He just never stops. He never gets hurt for long. He never has a bad year that knocks him out. He shows up for so many years that the totals pile up into something huge. The numbers look like the numbers of a god, but they were built one steady season at a time, not in a few blazing peaks. And many people put Sutton squarely in that group. The critics had real points. The Sutton won 20 games in a season only one time, back in 1976. Most all-time greats did that several times. He never won a Cy Young Award, the top honor for a pitcher. Not once in 23 seasons. He made only 4 All-Star teams in all those years. He was often standing in the shadow of bigger Dodgers legends like Sandy Koufax and Don Drysdale, men who burned brighter, even if they burned shorter. And when fans named the truly dominant arms of his era, they reached for names like Nolan Ryan and Tom Seaver, not Sutton. He was rarely the most feared man on the mound. So the negative read is fair. Sutton's totals were enormous, but his peak rarely felt like the peak of an all-time great. He did not light up the sky in any single summer. He just kept burning steadily, quietly for far longer than anyone else around him. And yet the totals cannot be ignored because they are staggering. He won 324 games, which ranks 14th in all of baseball history. He struck out 3,574 batters, 7th most ever. He started 756 games, 3rd most ever. He pitched 5,282 and 1/3 innings, 7th most ever. He won 10 or more games in 21 different seasons. He reached 200 innings in 20 of his first 21 seasons, year after year of heavy work. In 1980, he even led the whole National League in earned run average at 2.21, the best mark in the league that year. He sits in a tiny club. He is one of only 10 pitchers in all of history, with more than 3,000 strikeouts, more than 300 wins, and a career earned run average under 350. Those are not the numbers of a fraud. They are the numbers of a master craftsman. He did not beat hitters with raw speed. He beat them with control and brains and a deep bag of pitches. He ranked among the league's top 10 in strikeout to walk ratio 16 separate times. He led the league in base runners allowed per inning 4 times. That is not luck. That is precision repeated over and over for more than 2 decades. There is even one strange little number that captures how focused he was. Across his whole career, Sutton came to bat 1,559 times without ever hitting a single home run. That is the most homerless plate appearances of any player since the game was integrated. He simply did not care about hitting. He treated the bat as someone else's job. Every ounce of his attention went into pitching, into surviving, into lasting. That single odd record tells you everything about how narrowly and how stubbornly he focused on staying useful. But here's where the negative angle holds. Because his career was so long and so steady, the harder truths got buried under the totals. The fights, the accusations, the legal escapes, the self-protection, all of it faded behind that giant wall of numbers. The clean version simply pointed at the totals and said, look how great he was. Skip the cost. It skipped the controversy. The numbers became a way to end the conversation, not a way to tell the full story. The bigger the totals grew, the easier it was to forget how he sometimes got there. There was one more knock on Sutton that deserves a closer look, because this one was not entirely fair. People said he could not win the big one. They said he failed in October, when the games matter most, and the pressure is highest. That label followed him early in his career and stuck to him for a long time. But the research tells a different story, and it is worth setting the record straight. In the National League Championship Series, the round just before the World Series, Sutton was excellent. He went 4 wins and 1 loss with a 2.02 earned run average across 7 of those high-pressure games. And in the 1974 postseason, he was almost untouchable. He went 3-0 with a 1.50 earned run average and 25 strikeouts in just 4 games. Those are the numbers of a man who rose to the moment, not one who shrank from it. So that particular criticism does not hold up well. Notice the bigger pattern here, because it is the real point. Even his strengths were fought over. People argued about his cheating. People argued about whether he was truly dominant or just a compiler. People even argued about his record in October, when the facts say he was good. Almost nothing about Don Sutton was ever allowed to be simple. His whole legacy was a battlefield, picked over from every side. Praise and suspicion always traveled together. After his playing days ended in 1988, Sutton found a second life and a softer image. He moved into the broadcast booth in 1989. He joined the Atlanta Braves broadcast team on the TBS Superstation. He sat beside legendary voices like Skip Carey, Pete Van Wieren, and Ernie Johnson Sr. These were beloved men, the kind of broadcasters who feel like family to the fans at home, and Sutton fit right in beside them, and his timing was perfect. Sutton's voice became part of one of the great runs in all of baseball history. He called the famous worst-to-first 1991 Braves season, when a team that had finished dead last suddenly rose all the way to the top. He called their amazing streak of 14 straight division titles, a run no team had ever managed before. He called their 1995 World Series championship the crown on all those years of winning. For a whole generation of Braves fans, Sutton was simply part of the sound of summer. His voice meant baseball was on and life was good. In the booth, he built a warm and funny persona. He came across as folksy and easygoing. He played up being old-fashioned and a little afraid of new technology. In a 2012 broadcast, he joked that he believed everything he read on Wikipedia, as if it were all certain fact. He even had to ask his broadcast partner whether the word for using Twitter was really tweet. Fans loved it. It was charming. It was gentle. It made him feel like a kind old uncle telling stories in the booth, harmless and sweet. But think back to everything we just covered. This was the same man who once threw a baseball past an umpire on purpose. The same man who threatened to sue the entire National League to dodge a suspension. The same man accused of phoning the police on a struggling teammate who had already buried a child. The folksy voice was real, but it was also a soft cover over a very sharp mind. The man who charmed millions in the booth had spent decades battling teammates, umpires, front offices, and the league itself. The booth gave the public a kinder, simpler version of Don Sutton, and the public happily took it because the kinder version was so much easier to love. His final years were hard, and he faced them the way he faced everything, quietly and without quitting. Cancer kept coming back to him. He lost his left kidney to it in 2002. He had part of a lung removed in 2003. Most men would have stepped away from work after that. Sutton did not. He kept going. He stayed in the broadcast booth all the way until 2019, and he kept much of his health battle private the same way he had kept so much of himself private. The man's durability was never just about pitching. It was woven into who he was, right to the end. Then, before the 2019 season, he fractured his left femur, the large bone in the upper leg. The injury led to serious complications that he could not shake. He never fully recovered. He was never able to return to the Braves booth. The voice that had called all those great seasons, all those titles, and that championship went silent. He died peacefully at home on January 19, 2021, after his long and private battle with cancer. He was just 75 years old, and his death landed during a brutal stretch for the whole baseball world. The year 2020 had already taken 7 Hall of Famers, including Lou Brock, Tom Seaver, Bob Gibson, Phil Niekro, Whitey Ford, Al Killeen, and Joe Morgan. The game was burying its legends one after another. Then, just days before Sutton passed, his old manager Tommy Lasorda died on January 7, 2021. The same Lasorda who had built that Dodger family image all those years ago. The two men, so different in how they saw the game, left within weeks of each other. So what is the truth about Don Sutton? It is not the clean hero the tributes described, the gentle craftsman with the friendly voice. But it is not a simple villain either. The truth, like the man, lives in the messy middle. He was a hard, smart, stubborn survivor. He saw through the fake family image, and he said so out loud when most men would have stayed quiet. He fought a teammate in a cramped clubhouse and walked out bruised but unbroken. He made made a phone call that may have saved his own job at another man's painful expense. He used legal threats to beat a suspension that should have stuck to him. He bent the edge of the rules for years and laughed his way out of every single search. He put his career and his family first, again and again, even when it cost him friends and made him enemies. Through all of it, he never stopped. He pitched longer than almost anyone in the history of the game. He turned skill, nerve control, and pure self-preservation into one of the most durable records baseball has ever seen. He was not heroic in the clean, simple way the public was told. He was something more human and more complicated than that. He was a realist in a sport that loves its myths. A man who refused to pretend even when pretending would have been easier and safer. The lie was never some secret conspiracy. There was no cover-up, no hidden crime. The lie was the smoothing over. It was the way baseball took a sharp, calculating, rule-bending competitor and quietly sold him as a gentle, classy hero. The real Don Sutton was tougher than that. He was harder than that. He fought for every inch of his career, and he did not always fight clean. And here's the strange thing. That real version, the one with the bruises and the lawsuits and the cold phone call, is far more interesting than the polished one ever was. The myth makes a nice statue. The truth makes a real man. He earned his place in the Hall of Fame. He earned the respect that came pouring in at the end. Nobody can take those 324 wins away from him, but he earned all of it as a fighter, not a saint. He earned it the hard way, through stubbornness and survival and a will that never broke. And that, the part the tributes always left out, is the truest thing anyone can say about Don Sutton.